All right, welcome back to another episode of CRNA School Prep Academy podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Fennell, CRNA, and welcome back. So this week we are going to cover what are some questions that you should be asking in your in-person shadow experience. So I get asked this question a lot from people who are just kind of nervous about their in-person shadowing experience and want to make the most of it, but also want to understand, how to go about asking appropriate questions so they don't feel silly, right? Because I think that ultimately is what people are fearful of, is they're fearful of feeling silly. And first, I want to stress to you, please don't feel silly. It's okay. You don't know. You don't know. And if you don't know until you ask. And if any CRNA gives you some little attitude, well, you know what? They're just not the right person then, in my opinion. Because we've all been in your shoes, and most of us are very humble and grateful and excited to teach. And so I would say the vast majority of CRNAs, we don't bite, and we're happy to take students who want to be there to observe. We welcome you. For the most part, I've had other nurses say this too, like, wow, this profession as a whole, like if you compare like other nursing specialties, we're kind of a unique breed, if I say so myself, because I think the vast majority of CRNAs, I just think it's because they're humble, because they understand how much they worked or how hard they worked to become a CRNA and how scared and how unsure they were about themselves. So I think a lot of us can relate to that feeling, and therefore we have a soft spot for people who are also now in those shoes. And so a lot of us are really, really encouraging and helpful and want to bring you into this profession and want to nurture you and want to help you and guide you. And so there's no such thing as a stupid question. And I want to make sure that you feel comfortable asking questions. So that's what this episode is going to be all about. Now, you can grab our freebie below, which is our shadow documentation. I can also have a summary of these questions for you as well. And so that way, if you don't want to take notes during this episode, you can get the full list of questions to ask during your in-person shadowing experience down below, as well as the documentation part, which I'm going to kind of touch on. It's important to document your shadow experience, even if your school does not require this. I will say that most schools, or should say not most, some schools have their own documentation form. So if that's the case, use their form. But if they don't, you should still be documenting your experience, because it allows you to reflect on it later down the road. It also allows you to submit it as additional documentation, and it just kind of shows how robust and how determined you are, especially if you've shadowed 3 or 4 times over the last 3 or 4 years. And then it will allow you to compare your first shadowing experience documentation to your last shadowing experience documentation. I promise you're going to be blown away by how much more understanding you have from your first to your last. So I think that's kind of a cool thing too. And then when they ask you why CRNA, you're going to have a very good understanding, because you're going to be able to reflect on all your shadow experience that you've had, because you have it documented, you have it all written out. And I do guide you in this shadow documentation form. I actually do guide you on some of the things to document. All right, so first, what are some good times to ask these questions to the CRNA? I want to also start by saying it kind of depends on what your day looks like. Meaning, what type of case are you seeing? Are you in an open heart case that maybe is a big case? Are you in, a really fast turnover case, maybe an ENT day? Or are you in a robotics case where it's slow, so where you're going to have ample time to sit and potentially chat? So that can kind of depend. I also think you need to be very cognizant of what's going on at the moment, meaning if the CRNA looks like they're thinking or doing things or collaborating with the surgeon or the attending, that's probably not the best time to ask a question, because they're not going to be able to give you their full on attention. And if anything, it could also be distracting. So being aware of various times in the case and when it might be appropriate to actually ask a question versus not appropriate to ask a question. But I do encourage you, because sometimes you're like, well, what if I forget the question? I get it. Well, write it down. Bring a notebook with you and write the question down. And when things calm down, when you feel like it's not as crazy and chaotic, then ask the question, because you have it written down. So now you'll remember. So that's my suggestion around that. Other good times to ask questions is really first thing in the morning before pre-op. Not during the pre-op. And also, I've also had students come in my room when I'm trying to get ready for, like, say, an open heart day, and I'm drawing up all my drugs, which is a lot of drugs, and they're asking me question after question after question. And I'm like, ooh, like I don't, it kind of makes me like, I want to answer their question, but I'm also like, I want to focus on what I'm doing so I don't make a mistake, right? Or so I can be quick and efficient because the case starts in 15 minutes. So there has been times where I say, that's a great question, but I'll have to come back to that. So just keep that in mind. If they have to tell you that, don't take it the wrong way. Just know they're doing it, A, for safety and B, for efficiency. They still have to make sure they're keeping both those things in mind. But again, first thing in the morning before pre-op's a great time if they have the time. And then, typically I really want you to hone in the fact that you're there to observe and you're there to write down questions. And if they're drawing up certain drugs, you're not sure why, but maybe you think it's not a good time to ask, then maybe just write it down and then simply say, hey, you can even tell the CRNA like, hey, I have a list of questions. You let me know when's a good time that we can talk about them. And then that's kind of cool because then it kind of puts it in their realm of saying, oh, okay, yeah, I'll let you know when a good time we can chat. And usually for me, depending on what, we'll induce the patient, in the meantime, you're taking notes, right? You're writing down your questions that you're having about the induction process or about what drugs you used or the gas or whatever it is. Finish the induction, get the patient settled, position, yada, yada, incision, patient's doing great. So it can be kind of a little while before you actually are just kind of in what I call a maintenance phase of anesthesia. And at that point, charting. And at that point, then it's maybe, okay, now maybe I have 10 minutes before I have to start working on waking up this patient, not waking up, but, preparing for the emergence, depending on how fast the case is. You could have 10 minutes, 5 minutes, 2 hours, right? It just depends on the case. But that's really the moment where it would be easier for them to answer your questions in what I call the maintenance phase of anesthesia. Now, if it's a fast turnover room where you essentially induce, go to sleep, and then wake up, you may not really have a time to really answer a lot of questions until maybe a lunch break, right? Or maybe at the end of the day. So just be aware of that. And also you can ask for certain cases, meaning if you have the option to pick what case you want to observe and you're going to have a lot of questions, ask for a robotics room or a room and let the anesthesia provider who sets you up for the experience, let them know, I actually would love a day that I could maybe have more time to ask the CRNA questions. So if you could put me in a case that you think would be a little bit slower, I think that would be more beneficial for me. That's cool. If you know that, but if maybe you've already seen a few slow CRNA days and now you want to see a really rapid day with a CRNA who's doing 12 tonsils or something. So you can ask for that experience, but just know that, if you're picking a room like that, you're not going to be able to have a lot of time for questions other than maybe first thing in the morning, lunch break, and after the day's done. Because the CRNA is going to be chasing her butt or his butt the whole day to keep up. So that's some tips for when to ask the questions. Other tips is, waiting for the patient to enter the room once the CRNA seems like they're ready. So like I said, not while they're actively getting things ready, but if they're standing there and they're still waiting for the patient to show up and you feel like, okay, the CRNA is just killing time, that's a good time to start talking and asking questions. I mentioned the maintenance phase of anesthesia. If you're prompted, the CRNA, a lot of times, like I said, that's kind of where it's kind of nice if you say, I have some questions, you let me know when it's okay to ask these questions or when it's a good time to discuss. And then they'll prompt you. They'll say, okay, what questions do you have? They'll tell you when it's okay so that you can rely on that too. And yeah, the end of the day is great because it's kind of a really great way to kind of share your big takeaways, what you gathered out of the day, and also make some connections. So hopefully you can come back and shadow them again, get their number, get their email. It's a great way to, again, try to establish that relationship. I do think it's pretty cool if you're able to get in and shadow the same person more than once, especially if you end up needing a CRNA reference for CRNA school. So if you know that ahead of time, if you know you need a CRNA reference for CRNA school, start building that relationship early and try to come back and shadow the same CRNA multiple times, because then you're gonna have a killer reference letter versus picking a CRNA that maybe you only met for 2 hours once and asking them. They're not going to know you as well. But if you've been in there and you shadowed the same person 3 or 4 different times, you have to tell them your background, your story, who you are, why you're pursuing CRNA. They're going to be able to make that reference letter a lot more personable. So keep that in mind when you're seeking out shadow experiences. And don't feel bad if you don't have that. It's okay. You always do the best you can. As I've mentioned before, and if you haven't heard it, I'm going to say it again, but references don't make you, but they can break you. So it doesn't really matter. People, 99% of candidates have great references. But the 1% or 2% that don't, like that's kind of makes you like, well, that's kind of a big red flag, right? So it's the reference is not going to get you accepted. It's just kind of a hoop you have to jump through, as long as it's not a bad reference, meaning someone saying I don't recommend this person. It's really not going to it's going to help you, but it's not going to be the say all be all is what I'm saying. And don't get me wrong, having a great reference letter that's very personable is going to stand out to the panel. But it also a lot of times comes down to your interview along with other things as well. So, okay. So some examples on things to ask. I know I just chatted about a bunch of other things. All right. So maybe ask the CRNA why they chose a certain anesthetic plan. Was it related to something in the patient's medical history? Would they have heart issues, a history of a stroke? Are they a smoker, asthmatic, allergies, liver disease, kidney disease, etc.? Like understanding why they pick certain drugs, and is it based on the patient's medical history and why that is? Maybe you chose to do a MAC versus a general and why. So again, kind of understanding why they pick a certain plan or certain type of anesthetic. Maybe they did it TIVA. And if you don't know what a TIVA, you can look it up, but I'll share with you right now. It means total IV anesthetic. Okay. So that's a TIVA. Essentially all it is propofol, propofol, Precedex. But yeah, mostly just propofol. If someone's doing a TIVA, total intravenous anesthetic, it means that the patient typically has a history of postoperative nausea. Sometimes we've done it where patients have had recall, but that's not very often, but I have done it before on top of having some gas because for whatever reason, they've had recall issues with anesthesia. Hopefully I'm not freaking people out here. That's so rare. It's not common. And ultimately, usually when you ask about recall, it's usually they remember waking up on the table. It's not in the middle of a open abdominal case. They tend to remember like when they get lighter, when they're waking up and they hear the surgeons talking, maybe they're still suturing a little bit, like closing the patient. That's when I think the majority of recall happens, when people lighten you up, because yeah, you're waking up, the surgery's done, but are they still suturing? Yeah, they might be, but I mean, you can get sutures in the office too. But anyways, long story short. Yeah. So maybe why they picked a TIVA versus a general, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe ask about positioning, like why did you position a patient this way? Or what are some things you had to think about because you had to position this way? Like I noticed you took some extra time and patted this. Why is that? Then the CRNA can explain to you about the brachial plexus and how you have to pat it and protect it, and why the arms need to be supinated and things like that. So asking about, why patients are positioned a certain way and maybe some of the effects of that would be kind of a cool thing to understand. Pain needs, anticipating pain needs. How do they understand what the patient needs as far as pain needs? Sometimes patients come to you who are already routinely taking narcotics, and so that goes into consideration when we're thinking about postoperative pain. The case itself goes into consideration as far as how much pain. Some procedures are just not painful, especially if they can if they can localize well. They're not going to be painful afterwards. Other cases are excruciatingly painful. So how do you handle that? And also keep in mind that you don't want to over narcotize your patient because you need them to be breathing without a tracheal tube in their mouth at the end of the case. So kind of maybe they'll use low dose ketamine, or maybe they'll use remifentanil for the majority of the case, but there's not a lot of postoperative pain needs, but they can't have them move at all and they can't paralyze them, so they choose remifentanil. And why is that? So it'll allow you to kind of have these open discussions about what technique they're using and how they're planning on not only handling the pain, intraoperative pain control, but also postoperative pain control. And how do they gauge what the patient needs when the patient can't tell them they're having pain? I think that'd be kind of a cool conversation to have with the CRNA. I would encourage you to write down your observations with induction and just have questions around why they did certain things. Like, what's the purpose of taping the eyes? Or I'm trying to think what other kind of questions you have. how, I noticed you did that. You kind of moved their head a little bit. Why did you do that? And they can explain, how they get their view of the cords. Hopefully they'll get to see the cords. Hopefully they'll bring you over and allow you to look down and see into the cords. Whether they styletted the tube or didn't stylette the tube, whether they use a Mac blade or a Miller blade, maybe they use the bougie, maybe they use the glide scope, and just asking them questions about why they chose certain things will allow you to have a better understanding as to why we do what we do. And also, like, maybe you watch them push the induction drugs, but maybe you watch them chase with neosynephrine. Maybe but maybe they didn't do that in the prior case. Maybe you can ask why they anticipated needing to do that for this patient versus the other patient. So stuff like that, just being observant and, again, taking notes and kind of asking things like this. Or maybe the patient, maybe you observe the fact that the patient bottomed out their pressure, or maybe they got really hypertensive, and maybe ask them questions around like, well, and I noticed when they did that, you did this, you turned up your gas, or you gave more propofol, or you gave some ephedrine and some neo or whatever, and just start asking questions around how they anticipate those needs and how they know how much to give and things like that. Medications is always a great way to kind of ask questions about different medications they use. Like maybe they're giving some hydralazine at the end of the case. And maybe you could say, well, why would you pick hydralazine over labetalol or low pressor or esmolol or any other kind of medication that you can control their heart rate and blood pressure? So asking these types of questions as far as why they picked a certain drug. Why did you pick Clevaprex over Cardine? Why did you pick ketamine over fentanyl, or why did you pick etominate over propofol? So I do think it's worth your time to kind of understand the typical drugs used in anesthesia, so you can ask these pertinent questions. But also asking kind of lighthearted questions, such as what's your favorite type of anesthetic to provide and why? What's their least favorite anesthetic to provide and why? So as I promise you, we all have our least favorite and our most favorite. And it's interesting to kind of hear the why behind it. And I guarantee you'll probably, hopefully you'll get more than one shadow experience, you'll probably find that all CRNAs are a little different as far as what they like to do. And it's just a personal preference. But it could be very insightful because it'll allow you to say, oh, interesting. I kind of think that maybe I would agree with that. And I don't know if I would like it as much because of that reason as well. Or interesting, that's what I do like. They don't like that, but I do like that. There are some CRNAs who love neuro, right? I don't like neuro, but asking why they don't like neuro. Like for me, I don't like them being 180 degrees away, prone. I think brains are just gross. I don't know. It's just kind of like the whole taking the skull off. It's just like, ugh. And, that to me is just not my cup of tea. But open heart, it's amazing. But first, the head's right by me, and they're supine. So I feel like I have more control. So maybe it's a control issue. Maybe that's why I don't like neuros, because I don't feel like I have as much control because I don't like they're turned away. Don't get me wrong, it's fine, but you have to be very, very vigilant, diligent on making sure no one extubates your patient. It can happen. I mean, if tubes are hanging everywhere, you got to be very, very, it can be, and for me, another added level of stress because I'm always like, paranoid about it. Like, don't extubate my patient prone in Mayfield tongs, 180 degrees away. But what would you do? I'd go get the glide and re-intubate them as quickly as possible. Obviously, you can try to supine them, but by the time you do that, they're probably going to be blue. So anyways, just that could be a story for another day. And I'm sure it has happened before. So what are some considerations when waking this patient up from surgery? Every surgeon's like, have a smooth emergence, please. No bucking. Well, that's much easier said than done. In some cases, it's much more vital than others, like a carotid, for example. You don't want to have a giant hematoma because if they do, it could actually compromise their airway. Not to mention bleed from their brain, right? So, two bad things. But versus like, say, a lap appy, okay, well, you don't want them to cough, but it's not going to compromise their airway or their perfusion to their brain. Or like a thyroid, another same thing. You don't want those to cough because you compromise your airway and bleed. So, those types of emergencies can be very different in the sense that, like, what kind of precautions are you going to take? And how pertinent is that you don't have that patient cough at all. Neuro case is the same thing. You don't want a neuro patient to buck and cough and get hypertensive because now they could bleed back into their brain. It actually has happened to me where a patient, and it wasn't because they were bucking, but their blood pressure just they woke up and their blood pressure went boom, like really, really quick, despite having medication on board. And so then they bled and had to go back to CT and go back and evacuate the hematoma. And, it was a lot, but the patient was fine. But these types of things can happen. So again, taking extra precaution in how you wake those patients up is really, really key. And so asking and talking that through with the CRNA would be helpful. How much fluid do you give, and how do you know how much to give? How do you calculate fluid management in a patient? How do you calculate insensible loss? Ask about insensible loss and how they go about that for certain cases, because certain cases have more insensible loss. A big abdominal case with GI, guts everywhere, or they're going to have more evaporation going on than, a little elbow fracture. So, the GI case would require a lot more fluid than someone having a fracture done. An elbow fracture. Hips can be bloody. But anyways, what is the scariest thing that's happened to them as an anesthesia provider? I think this is really kind of a unique question to kind of talk through, because all CRNA providers will have these moments of like, this is when this went down. This is what I did. This was like probably the scariest time. I think I have multiple scary times actually in my profession, but definitely a small handful stand out to be the worst. And so I would love to talk to a student about that and how I handle that, how I went through that, and maybe even how I handled having a patient die, and that kind of thing, because it does happen. Now, I think in the realm of ICU world that you're used to, you see death all of the time. You do not see death all the time in anesthesia, thank goodness, right? Otherwise, no one would want to go have surgery and go under anesthesia if everyone just died. 99.9% of the time, anesthesia is a very happy place, a very rewarding career. You're essentially removing the suffering from patients versus, watching them suffer like you do in the ICU. So don't feel like you're going to see a lot of patients die, because you don't. But it would be kind of nice to talk to a CRNA through that and how they handle that, and how often they have seen stuff like that happen, to give you a good idea for your own understanding on what you can expect in this career. All of this is your shadow experience, you guys, is really so you can gauge whether this is really the career path for you. As I've mentioned in other episodes, sometimes students get into anesthesia school, get into clinical, and we're like, oh, whoa, this is not what I expected. I don't want this. Bye, I'm out. And that's just not a good place. You don't want to be there. Your shadow experience is really to determine not only A, do you understand what you're getting yourself into, but B, do you want it? Do you want this for yourself? And if you go into your shadow experience and get goosebumps and get all excited and you're just like, oh, I want this even more now. Like, then this is for you. Then you got to give it your all, give it your best effort to get into CRNA school. Because if you don't have that like goosebump passion drive to pursue this, and things get rough and you get a rejection or you have a setback, you're going to need to pull from that. You're going to need to pull from that like intense passion. Say, no is not never, and no, not yet. I'm going to keep going. I'm going to figure this out. I want this. I want this. I want this. I want this, right? So I encourage you to shadow to get that passion, that fire within you, so you can persevere, not just to get in, but all the way through the end till graduation day. So again, you want to understand what this profession is about, so see if it's a good fit for you. You can ask, why do they find this career rewarding? And where do they see themselves in 10 years? Have they worked any other anesthesia jobs? So I think these are all really great questions, because again, you're going to get some insight as to how and why they find this career rewarding for them. For me, it's funny. My reward out of my career has really shifted throughout my short 8 years as an anesthesia provider. When I first started, the reward for me was like getting tons of experience and just getting my hands in everything and seeing it all and getting some really good experience. That was like what I really wanted. And I found that really rewarding, exciting, different, challenging. I really thrived, and I still do enjoy a variety. I still do enjoy being challenged. I do think that's a big part of why I chose to become a CRNA. But I also, once I started a family, now it became about, well, how can I make this career work for my life, not the other way around? Meaning I want to work so I can live, not live to work. So my priority now is family, home, being home. Like, that's what I want. So then it became, how can I make this career flexible so it fits my life? And I've also found a lot of reward and satisfaction with that, because I have a very flexible job. I have a lot of opportunities that exist. There's so many opportunities in anesthesia. You just have to look, and you also just have to network. Like, that's a big, big thing, is networking within this profession. I promise you, it will unlock doors that you never knew existed. So network, go to state associations, go through the ANA. Not only is it good for our profession, you want to support your own profession, but it's a really, really great way to network. Where do they see themselves in 10 years, right? Retired? No. Or do they like, well, I mean, me in 10 years, I don't even know where I'd see myself in 10 years. I'm still providing anesthesia. I do know that, but am I going to be at the same job? That part I don't know. Knowing how I am and how I really crave a variety, I may want something else. But the thing is, like, I would never limit myself to do the same thing forever. If I get to a place, complacency is definitely a word that I try to avoid, meaning, if I ever feel like I'm getting to, not stable, that's probably not, because I like stability, but I like to challenge myself. I guess it's the best way I know how to put it. Is I like variety. I like to challenge myself. I want to seek out experiences that bring me satisfaction, bring me joy. And for me, that's a variety. For me, that's kind of pushing my own limits and seeing how I can be a better provider, seeing how I can learn and keep, improving my own skills. So that's kind of what I always strive to do in my profession, whether that's in education, whether that's in clinical skills, whether that's in just professional development. All of those things for me, I find very rewarding to just always push forward and see how I can give back, see how I can give to myself. So 10 years, I don't know, but I know these are things that I'm interested in, and I'm going to always challenge myself to do more with those things. Have you ever worked another anesthesia job? This is really interesting because jobs are all so different. I mean, I've only had 3. Not that I've had a lot of different jobs in my 8 years as an anesthesia provider, but they're all very, very different in positive and negative for their own ways, own reasons, different staff, different surgeons, just very, very unique. Not like just unique how I felt as far as was it for me or was it not for me. You're never going to find a place that's 100% perfect. I will say that. You're always going to have some things that you're like, well, can I deal with this? I mean, am I happy enough overall to where I can put up with some things that I necessarily don't like? Because it's kind of impossible to find a place that everything is pristine and perfect, because it just doesn't exist. Perfection does not exist. But you again have to pick and choose what's important to you and go from there. So that being said, I really respect all the different places I've worked for their own reasons. And I've learned a lot from all of those places. And I'm grateful and thankful for that. And, it's one of those things where you just always have to come back to a place of gratitude. Even if you went to a place that maybe you didn't thrive, maybe you're like, man, this wasn't for me. That's okay. Because it's not meant to be for everyone, right? Because you are your own person. But having respect for your coworkers and the value that they provided you, the training they provided you, the camaraderie, the friendship, that is something you're grateful for. You will always have that as a part of you, and your experience will always exist. So making sure you're always leaving a position with good intentions, with the right mindset, knowing that you did, even if it wasn't for you, you did walk away with so much, and you have so much to be grateful for. And the fact that as a CRNA, you have so many options as far as various careers, different places to work, that in itself is a huge blessing. You will never be stuck in a place you're not happy at. And it's not even that other people will thrive in that environment. Maybe it's just not for you. So I hope I can leave you guys with that. You have so much to look forward to. That this career field is so vast. You can literally find so many things to do, whatever piques your interest. For me, it was, I wanted to do open heart right away. Okay, I did that. I wanted to do OB. I did that. I wanted to work with peds. I did that. I wanted to learn how to do regional. Okay, I did that. So that's what I'm saying. I'm always like, what do I want out of my career? And I'll find a way to make it happen. So you have that power to control the experiences you get as an anesthesia provider. And so your future is bright. And thank you so very much for tuning in. Be sure to grab your freebie. It's your shadow experience documentation, along with a summary of different questions you can ask and different tips for your in-person shadowing experience. I will see you next week. You guys take care.